Okay, so this is a really wonky picture of the brainstem, but use your imagination. This is the brainstem. We're going to call this the hypothalamus up here. All right, and the pons and the medulla. Because respiratory control comes from both the pons and the medulla. So if you're looking, again, this is the pons, this is medulla. There are little nuclei here, little places where there's nerves coming out. And there's two little areas or nuclei areas in the pons and two in the medulla. So the medulla basically contains the respiratory center, okay? So the medulla has control over actual breathing. The pons kind of helps, all right? So in the medulla, there are these two sets of nuclei, and one is called the VRG, and the other, I'm just doing a different color just so we can see it, is the DRG. So the DRG is called the dorsal respiratory group. Dorsal respiratory group, or DRG. This is the inspiratory center. Inspiratory center. Okay, so it sends impulses to the phrenic nerve. And if you remember, the phrenic nerve innervates the diaphragm. And we know that the diaphragm instigates or starts a breath, starts an inspire, okay? Breathing in. So it sends impulses to the phrenic nerve, and it also sends impulses to the external intercostals. So they are what start that inhale. All right, so the VRG is the ventral respiratory group. And this is the expiratory center. So that seems kind of weird because expiration is basically a passive motion, right? You breathe in and your diaphragm relaxes, everything relaxes, and the air goes out, basically because of changes in pressures. So this one is only active during forced expiration. So it will send impulses to internal intercostals and abdominal muscles. And that allows you to forcefully blow out air from your lungs. Okay, so this is the main two things. Remember, the medulla is where the respiratory center is, and these two nuclei are part of that. It's what allows us to breathe at all. So the medulla sets the rate and rhythm of normal breathing. All right. So the pons also has these two like nuclei in them, and one of them is called the PC, and it is called the pneumotaxic center. All right, and it regulates breathing. Okay, this other one is called the AC, or the apnostic center. And this thing coordinates transition between inhalation and exhalation. Coordinates the transition between the inhale and the exhale. It basically fine-tunes the respiratory centers, fine-tunes things. Okay, so that's a coordinated thing. So the pons itself basically regulates the rate and depth of breathing. Okay, so other things, this is basically what's going on nerve-wise in the brainstem as far as breathing. But there are lots of things that feed back to that cause a change in the depth of the breath or the rate of your breathing or that kind of thing. So the things that feed back are all kinds of like receptors and things like that. So we have things like peripheral receptors in things like vessels. And these receptors pick up things like increase in CO2 or increase in hydrogen or something like that, and that will feed back to the brainstem. Okay. Central receptors. So these are receptors just in the brain, neural receptors, and they can give the same information. Increases in CO2, increases in hydrogen, and that feeds back. Your muscles, the proprioceptors, also feed back here. When your muscles are active, they're making ATP, they're producing a whole bunch of CO2 as the waste, and you have to increase your breathing to get rid of that. Voluntary, so they're like voluntary control centers in the cortex. So the cerebrum there, those feed back here. So if you need to breathe out heavy, like blowing out candles or blowing out fire or something like that, you're able to do that voluntarily. Let's see. Receptors for irritants. So, you've got your lungs here, right? And, someone's over here smoking. It's getting in your lungs. So that's irritating. So irritant receptors. And they basically tell you to do things like cough, right? There are also stretch receptors. Because remember, the lungs stretch to breathe in and they retract to go back down. So if they're stretched or whatever, that can feed back to the center. All right, so that's basically breathing, a very general sense of how breathing is controlled. And that's about it for the respiratory system.